what it truly means to live. I want to invite you to learn about my story, to walk with me through that brief moment that marked a before and after in my understanding of faith, love, and family. If at any point you have wondered if there is something beyond our immediate reality, or if you have doubted those stories that seem impossible, I encourage you to listen to this testimony. Not only did it change my perspective of the world, but it also led me to discover a hope I didn't know existed. My name is Sergio Johnson, and until a few months ago, I lived convinced that death was simply the ultimate end. I didn't believe in an afterlife, neither in heaven nor hell, but in simple emptiness. For as long as I can remember, my mind had focused on concrete facts and the logic of what I could measure or prove. I saw religion as an outdated concept, a kind of walking stick for those who don't dare to face the uncertainty of the world. Meanwhile, my wife, Clara, always maintained a discreet but solid faith. She prayed silently, hoping that one day I would open my heart to something greater than my own reason in our home. My skepticism clashed with Clara's spiritual trust. She never imposed her beliefs on me, but I noticed how she watched me with concern, especially when our youngest daughter, Andrea, asked questions that made me uncomfortable. Andrea, barely 8 years old, looked at the world with genuine curiosity. Every now and then, she would come closer and ask me questions about what happens after we die. I always evaded the subject with ambiguous answers, unable to admit that it scared me more than I wanted to accept. Professionally, I was doing well. I worked as a data analyst and was at the top of my game. But the price of success turned out to be high: endless hours, growing stress, and unhealthy habits that were starting to show. Clara warned me. I noticed my breathing was shallow and a tiredness I preferred to ignore. "I'm fine, don't worry so much," I used to reply. I was convinced that I could handle it all. It was an ordinary morning at the office when my world turned upside down, between the constant buzzing of computers and the incessant avalanche of emails. I was halfway through. From a presentation, the atmosphere felt tense and my colleagues were only half attentive, but everything was going as usual until an intense pain suddenly shot through my chest. My vision blurred. I tried to catch my breath, but couldn't. Before anyone could react, I collapsed. I remember chaos around me, shouting and rushing that I barely registered as my consciousness faded. Then everything went dark. The paramedics arrived quickly, but by then my heart had stopped beating for more than 15 minutes. My body lay inert on the floor while the doctors struggled to bring me back, but I wasn't there with them. I felt like I was somewhere else, one I would never have imagined, not even in my wildest dreams. My vision of reality shattered into 1,000 pieces because in that time, I experienced something that shook every certainty I had built up until then. I believed that death was a void, an end with no return, but I discovered that wasn't what happened during those minutes. It transformed me completely and, without knowing it, also marked the future of my family. The next thing I knew, I was floating above my body as if my perspective didn't depend on anything physical. I found myself lying on the floor, surrounded by my colleagues, all terrified. One of them screamed, asking for emergency help, even though I could barely hear a distant murmur. It felt like I was watching a strange scene, floating aimlessly. That's when I noticed the silence. An immense, heavy silence that contrasted with the confusion in the room. Suddenly, I was pulled into something I didn't understand, and the office was left behind. That's where my journey truly began. One I never imagined I would embark on and that my analytical mind would find difficult to explain. Then I noticed something unusual. Everything around me seemed rushed and chaotic, but there was no sound. Only a silence so heavy that it felt almost suffocating. Suddenly, I felt something pulling me out of that room, as if a void were pulling me, and I found myself somewhere else. At first the only thing that surrounded me was darkness, an abyss so overwhelming that I felt panic just looking at it. However, in the distance, I saw a light that pulsed with an undeniable warmth and that drew me as if it were calling me without saying a word. I tried to deny what I was witnessing, thinking it was the last hurrah of my dying brain. But no logical explanation could erase the fact that it felt more real than anything I had ever experienced. The light intensified, and before I knew it, I was standing there, or perhaps floating, in a place whose solidity seemed even more tangible than my previous existence. It was then that I saw him. I can't find enough words to describe him. He wasn't just a figure, but a living fusion of light, love, and truth. Jesus. Even as I write this, I find it hard to believe it's my own voice admitting it. He didn't speak as we do, but I understood completely. His very presence exuded love and an authority that left me exposed, though I felt no reproach, but rather an affection that pierced me completely. Without warning, everything around us changed. Before me appeared Clara, my wife, sitting at the kitchen table, her face hidden in her hands, pain transforming her face. I saw her older, burdened by a grief I didn't know could exist. On the other hand, my son Gabriel looked furious and lost, heading toward decisions I never wanted for him, and my little Andrea, so sweet and curious, looked at Clara with heartbreaking questions, trying to figure out where I was. Jesus turned to me and, without saying a word, made me understand the gravity of what I was witnessing. It was the future that awaited my family if I continued on my path of self-sufficiency and denial. I wanted to defend myself, claiming I was a decent person who didn't need religious refuge to act with kindness. But the more I insisted, the more I understood how blinded pride had been, and my obsession with solving everything alone had dragged my family to a brink of suffering I hadn't imagined. Scared, I begged for a second chance. I pleaded for the strength to be different and have the courage to believe. I felt a love so great it overwhelmed me, and suddenly everything vanished. I opened my eyes suddenly, gasping as I heard the doctors' voices around me shouting that I had done it, my heart beating again. I breathed in the sterile air of the hospital, and reality hit my body as if it were the first time I existed. I woke up surrounded by the familiar faces of Clara, Gabriel and my little Andrea, but at first, I didn't really know who they were. It was as if I needed to recognize them again. Clara cried inconsolably while holding my hands, and Gabriel, with his arms crossed, hid his concern behind a serious look. Andrea hid behind one of her stuffed animals, a mixture of relief and bewilderment written on her little face. I tried to talk to them, to tell them what I had witnessed, but my mind was still tangled up in sensations that I couldn't put into words. How could I describe how I had stood before Jesus, whom I had mocked all my life? I knew nothing would ever be the same again, because after what I felt and saw, the perspective no longer made any sense. The doctor entered the room, interrupting the silence with an air somewhere between relief and concern. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "you're very lucky to be alive. Your heart stopped beating for over 15 minutes. We weren't sure it would make it." 15 minutes was all it had lasted. Yet, in that time, I felt like I'd lived longer than in my 42 years. I tried to thank him with a trembling voice, even though deep down I knew it wasn't just the hands of the medical team that brought me back. In the days that followed, I preferred to remain silent. About what had happened, my mind replayed every moment of that experience over and over again, trying to make sense of it all. At night, while Clara thought she was sleeping, I heard her praying with gratitude, thanking a God I had rejected for so long. I felt the irony. The same God I always considered unnecessary or non-existent had given me another chance. I thought about confessing to Clara what I witnessed, but the fear of her reaction it paralyzed me. What would she think of me? Would she believe my words or think it was a gesture to reassure her? Even so, every time I saw Gabriel, I remembered the fragments of that future that she showed me, her anger, her disorientation, the risk that she would stray from all that was good, and when Andrea asked one of her innocent questions, something inside me shrank, fearing that without me, she would be left without a guide to distract her. I took refuge in science and began reading articles about near-death experiences, looking for an explanation that didn't involve God. Maybe it was a neurological phenomenon caused by a lack of oxygen, I told myself. But no medical theory could get the image of Jesus out of my head. One afternoon, while I was absorbed in my computer screen, Clara came in. She said in a low voice, "Are you okay?" I tried to downplay it, but a confused voice came out of my mouth. I saw something cautiously. Clara sat down next to me, waiting for her to continue. I struggled to find the words, but finally, I told her about the light of that presence, which I recognized as Jesus, and about the visions she showed me. While she spoke, I felt weak and vulnerable, although surprisingly liberated, as if release a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. When I finished, Clara's tears didn't express disbelief, but a deeper emotion that disarmed me. "I've prayed for this for so long," she whispered, and my defenses grumbled as I remembered how much I mocked her faith. Gabriel, on the other hand, reacted sarcastically when Clara mentioned my experience at the following dinner. "So now you believe in this God stuff," he said, arms crossed, using a tone that was meant to be mocking. Although I sensed some confusion behind his anger, I didn't know how to explain it, and he didn't seem willing to listen. Even with Gabriel's distancing himself, something inside me had transformed irreparably. I couldn't go back to being the person I always was. I no longer had answers for everything, but at least I knew in which direction to start looking. The days following my confession to Clara passed with a deceptive calm. My body was still recovering from the collapse, and I felt like my mind never stopped. At night, it was enough to close my eyes so I could relive each image of the vision, wondering what I was supposed to do from that moment on. The image of the future Jesus revealed to me became a constant presence in every interaction with my family. One afternoon, while Clara and Andrea were playing a board game in the living room, I headed to Gabriel's room. The door was ajar, and music was filtering through the crack. I knocked softly and walked in without waiting for a reply. He was lying on the bed, swiping on his phone. What did he mumble? He barely looked at me. I took a breath and let it out slowly. "Can we talk?" Gabriel rolled his eyes but didn't kick me out. "What about?" I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the tension between us about what happened to me. About what I saw. He finally put down his phone and paid attention to me, even though his features showed clear skepticism. "You mean your vision?" he said, punctuating the word with imaginary quotation marks and a mocking tone. "As in you? Getting upset does sound crazy, and I know you think I've lost my mind, but Gabriel, it was real. I saw you, your mom, your sister. I saw how things could end." He let out a bitter laugh. "So what? Did God tell you we're destined for damnation?" I firmly denied. "No, we're not doomed, but he showed me the path we were headed if I didn't change, if we didn't change." Gabriel sat up, crossing his arms. "Well, what's your big revelation then?" "That we should go to church and sing in choir." His hostility hurt, but I forced myself to speak calmly. "I still don't have all the answers, but I'm sure I was wrong about many things. Faith, God, the way I handled this family." I saw a flash in his eyes, as if for a second there was a hint of vulnerability, but he immediately shook his head. "I don't buy it. You've been saying for years that believing is nonsense, and now you expect me to believe you. Just because of a near-death experience?" I sighed, almost in a whisper. "I don't expect you to believe me. I just want you to know that I believe it, and I plan to dedicate the rest of my life to understand what Gabriel means to me and to you." He said nothing, just held my gaze, a mixture of disbelief and something I couldn't decipher. A week later, I had a dream full of symbolism. I appeared in a vast field, shrouded in a fog so thick you could almost touch it from some point. Muffled voices emerged in the distance, like familiar murmurs. I walked toward that sound, making my way through the mist until I reached a clearing where I came across a tree unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its branches reached immense heights, and its roots sank deep into the earth. But it was dead. Its leaves were fragile and blackened. The trunk was cracked and hollow. As I gazed at it, I was overcome by a feeling of loss so heartbreaking that I struggled to breathe. I felt that tree was a reflection of something internal, something I had let dry out without paying attention. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone approaching. I recognized him. Immediately, Jesus was a figure who combined warmth and authority in an almost impossible way. He didn't say a word, but I knew exactly what he wanted to tell me. My life was that tree dying with no roots in it. I woke up startled, my heart racing and drenched in sweat. Clara stirred in bed, reaching out to touch my arm without lifting her eyelids. "Are you okay?" she whispered sleepily. I nodded, trying to calm the pounding that was reverberating in my chest. Yes, it was just a dream, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a revelation urging me to put down roots in something more solid than my own self-sufficiency. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with Clara, trying to find the courage to tell her what I'd been mulling over for a while. "I need to start over," I murmured, my heart racing. "I don't know where it came from, but I want to rebuild my life and our family's life on something true about faith." I saw her eyes fill with emotion before she smiled. "I'll be with you every step of the way," she promised, and those words gave me a burst of courage. Even so, I understood it wouldn't be easy. Gabriel remained distant. Andrea had doubts for which she had no answers, and I had to deal with years of skepticism that wouldn't disappear overnight. However, for the first time, I didn't feel alone on this journey. The first time I walked through the door of a church after my experience, I felt like I was stepping into uncharted territory. Everything seemed strange and at the same time slightly familiar: the hymns, the prayers, the people raising their hands as if reaching for something I couldn't see. I sat in the back pew, my heart pounding, hoping not to stand out. Clara offered to join me, but I explained that I needed to do it alone, and she understood, although I saw the unease in her eyes. Gabriel didn't say anything when I left the house, but I caught a glimpse of his sly smile, convinced that it would simply be a passing stage in the service. The pastor spoke of grace and how it isn't something one earns, but an undeserved gift. Although I tried hard to retain every word, my mind wandered to the image of my family, broken in the dry tree of my dream, and in the moving presence of Jesus. When the congregation was invited to pray, I wasn't able to close my eyes. I remained motionless, clinging to the back of the pew, wondering if I could truly let go of my old way of thinking. After the service, an older man approached me with a transparent smile and the bearing of someone. He introduced himself as Humberto, a retired carpenter, and shook my hand affectionately. "First time here?" he asked in a warm tone. I nodded, stammering something so as not to seem rude. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here," he offered. I didn't know how to respond, but his hospitality lingered in my mind during the walk home. The situation with Gabriel, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly tense. He wasn't aggressive, but his sarcasm was piercing, and the distance between us was noticeable. One night, when he saw me reading a book about the Bible, something unthinkable to me before, he stopped in the doorway. "So now you're doing this reading about God as if I'd been a monk all my life," he snapped with contempt. He made it clear he was waiting for my answer, so I closed the book slowly. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Gabriel gestured with his hand as if encompassing the room. "You sitting there with the Bible, suddenly so devout. You always said all these beliefs were fairy tales. What happens when you get bored and change your mind again?" His words stung, because I knew he partly had reason to doubt me. I'd spent years making fun of the faith, and now I was reaping what I had sown. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't have all the answers, but I know what I experienced, and I can't pretend it didn't happen." "Well, I can," he said, turning to leave the room. Gabriel called after him. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "I've made mistakes. I failed you in many ways, but I don't want to leave things like this. I want to change, and I hope that one day you'll be able to understand." He didn't respond. He just continued on his way, and I felt the weight of each of my words that night as I went to bed. I prayed for the first time in decades. It wasn't a refined prayer, but a deep and sincere plea, asking for guidance, strength, and some way to reach Gabriel before it was too late in the morning. The next morning, my phone rang, and I heard Humberto's kind voice. "I've been thinking about you." He said there's a men's group that meets on Wednesday nights to talk about life and faith. Nothing formal, just honest conversations. "I think you'd benefit." My first impulse was I was tempted to reject it, but the memory of Jesus' voice and the vision of the withered tree stopped me, so I accepted. Wednesday arrived, and I entered the church basement nervously but determined to take that step. The group was small. Humberto and a few other men, most of them older than me, welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't expected. As each shared their story, I told them mine, my near-death experience, my vision of my family, and the internal battle to reconcile what I'd experienced with my old way of seeing the world. No one judged me. On the contrary, they told me about their own doubts, moments of faith and redemption. I felt that for the first time I wasn't carrying this burden alone. However, this new path generated tension at home. Clara supported me, but Gabriel's resentment grew, and even Andrea, with her innocence, sensed an atmosphere of uncertainty. One night, as I tucked her in, she looked at me with her wide, curious eyes. Dad said gently, "Do you really believe Jesus is real?" His question caught me off guard, but only I was able to answer her sincerely. "I believe it, darling." She nodded thoughtfully. "Mom says, he loves us, it's true." The emotion welled up in my throat. Yes, he loves us more than we can imagine. When I kissed her to wish her good night, I felt how little I still understood, not only of my new faith but also of how to guide my family through this whirlwind. The first major setback to my budding faith soon appeared in the form of hurtful comments and poorly concealed smiles. My skeptical and mocking past didn't fade overnight, and people didn't easily forget it. One Friday night, Clara and I attended a neighbor's get-together. Something we used to enjoy a lot. The faces were the same. Gathered around a bonfire with glasses of wine, we barely took a step into the yard. Luis, a longtime acquaintance, greeted me with pats on the back. "Look who showed up," he exclaimed with false joviality. "Hey, Sergio, you haven't been here in a while. I heard you've changed life." I didn't notice the mocking tone in his words and forced a smile, just re-evaluating a few things. I responded, trying to sound neutral. Luis raised an eyebrow with an amused expression. "Re-evaluating sounds like a midlife crisis, my friend." Some laughter rose around us, and I felt the old defensiveness creeping in. For years, I was the one who made jokes about other people's beliefs. Clara, noticing, placed a soft hand on my arm, reminding me with that simple touch to stay calm. I took a deep breath and, without losing my composure, answered, "It's not just that. I had an experience that made me see things differently. It's hard to explain, but it helped me realize that I was wrong about many things." I noticed how Luis and the rest looked at me with suspicion or curiosity, not knowing quite what to make of that sudden transformation within me. I fought the urge to regress to my previous cynical stance, but I clung to the certainty that my old way of being didn't fit with everything I had discovered. Arturo let out a mocking smile. "Wrong, what?" "Sergio. God. Religion. Come on, you can't even swallow all that. You really weren't the one who said it was just a thought for weak minds." His words told me. They hurt more than I admitted at the time. Perhaps because they reminded me of who I was for a long time. "I know what I said," I responded in a firm voice, "and I was wrong. I see it now." Arturo laughed. "Wow, you really took the sacred brew." We continued talking, but the tension in the air never disappeared. Later, as Clara and I were walking home, she turned to me with a hint of pride. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Why did I ask someone who was upset about Arturo's comments about standing firm? "You didn't let it get to you, and that's not easy," she replied. They kept going around in my head, making me understand that my personal journey didn't concern me alone. It involved living in a way that perhaps the world around me wouldn't be willing to accept or understand. At home, my relationship with Gabriel was reaching a critical point. One night after dinner, he abruptly put his plate down in the sink and turned to me, his face flushed with anger. "Why are you doing this?" he snapped. "Why are you pretending to be someone you're not?" I felt a lump in my throat. "I'm not pretending," I replied, trying not to alter my tone. "That's who I am now." "You're not," he retorted harshly. "You're just trying to make yourself feel better. Do you really think you can fix everything at the last minute? With that whole believing in God thing, it doesn't work like that." His words hit me hard, and I saw the pain and confusion behind his fury. "I know I made mistakes," I finally admitted. "I've done things I can't undo, but I'm not doing this to erase the past. I'm doing this because I saw something, a truth I can't deny." Gabriel let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "You can believe whatever you want, but don't expect me to follow you with those words." He left the room, leaving me with a huge feeling of emptiness in the midst of my despair. I started meeting with Humberto more frequently one afternoon. While we were in a quiet corner of the church, I confessed my greatest fear. "I feel like I'm losing Gabriel, no matter what. What do you do? Don't you listen? Do you think this is all a farce?" Humberto nodded thoughtfully. "It's hard to see someone you love resist what you know could save him," he said with a tinge of sadness in his voice. "My son was the same. He mocked me. Every time I spoke about faith, I learned that you can't force anything. The only thing you can do is live it. Show it with your actions in such a consistent and authentic way that he can't help but notice the difference in you." His words accompanied me that night. As I took refuge in my study, opening a Bible I barely understood. Suddenly, a verse jumped out at me. "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." I understood with that clarity that sometimes appears suddenly, that my actions, more than any explanation, would be the bridge to Gabriel. The following days were marked by slight but decisive changes. I paid more attention when Gabriel spoke, even about trivial things like school or his friends. I apologized when I lost my patience, something I would have had a hard time admitting before. And every night, after everyone went to sleep, I prayed for him, asking him to find the peace I so longed for my family. One afternoon while I was cleaning the kitchen, Gabriel came in silently, took a glass of water, and leaned against the counter without saying a word. Suddenly, with a hint of sincerity, he blurted out, "I don't understand." "Don't you understand what?" I replied cautiously, still holding the plate in my hands. "Why are you doing all this? Why do you care so much?" I stopped washing and turned to look at him. "Because I love you," I said simply. "And because I believe this is the truth, I want you to know it too. But I know I can't force you. I can only try to be better every day. And trust that one day you'll understand." Gabriel didn't answer, but the way he looked at me was less hostile than usual. It was as if I could finally see beyond his anger. From then on, the atmosphere at home became an unstable equilibrium, with moments of closeness emerging amidst doubt and fear. I still felt Gabriel's anger throbbing beneath the surface, but it didn't erupt as frequently, and sometimes I was surprised to find him staring at me with a questioning look in his eyes, as if he were trying to decipher what was really happening inside me. It wasn't just Gabriel. I felt like my whole world was changing, and what had once seemed simple now carried a complexity I hadn't anticipated. One day, Clara and I sat down to have coffee after returning from church. Taking advantage of the time Andrea was busy in the room, Clara absent-mindedly turned the spoon in her cup and then asked, "Have you noticed how much Gabriel has isolated himself lately?" I nodded, recognizing that same detail. "It's as if he avoids talking to me unless he absolutely has to." Clara sighed. "He's scared, Sergio. For years, You are his reference point for understanding the world, and seeing you so different now disorients him. He feels like the ground is moving beneath his feet." Her words confronted me. I'd been so absorbed in my own search that I didn't realize how disoriented my son must feel. "What do I do?" I whispered. "Be patient and don't give up on him. He needs to prove that this isn't just a passing stage, but a real process," Clara insisted. With his life, that night, reading the Bible in my study, I came across a passage from James that shook me. "The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." I had been praying for Gabriel for days, but those words gave me new courage. The next day, while he was checking his phone at the kitchen table, I gathered my courage and greeted him with a simple, "Hello, Gabriel." With a frown, he looked up. "What's wrong?" I took a breath and let it out immediately. "Would you like to go hiking this weekend?" I saw the doubt in his expression. "Why?" "Because it's been a while since we spent time together," I said sincerely, "and I miss it." He thought about it for a moment and shrugged. "I guess it's okay." The hike proceeded in a somewhat awkward silence, only the sound of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional bird song accompanying us. I tried to make conversation, but his answers were short, as if he didn't know how to start. An hour later, we reached a clearing with a stunning view of the valley. We sat down on a rock to catch our breath. "Remember how much you loved coming here?" I murmured. Gabriel just shrugged and looked at the vastness of the landscape. "I know," I continued. "Everything has become difficult lately. Have you noticed I've changed? And I understand it feels strange, but I want you to know that I'm still your father and I'll be there for you no matter what I believe." He finally looked at me, visibly agitated. "You're not the same as before. You talk too much about God and Jesus, and it feels strange." "It's not you." His words hurt me, but I didn't get upset. "You're right. I'm not the same, but it's not that you're trying to be different on a whim. But I need to be better for you, for Clara, for Andrea, and for Miss." Gabriel shook his head, confused. "I don't understand. Before, you said that religion was for people who couldn't think for themselves." He changed. I took a breath, aware that I needed to be completely honest. He changed because I saw something I can't explain. In the hospital, when my heart stopped, I saw Jesus. Gabriel. I saw him, and he taught me things about our family, about our future. It wasn't just a dream, it was real, and he transformed me. Gabriel looked at me with an expression that was impossible to read. "Do you really believe this?" I answered firmly. "I do, and I know it's complicated for you to process. Sometimes, even for me, it's difficult, but I can't ignore it." Silence enveloped us. Then, Gabriel stood up and shook the dirt off his pants. "Let's go," he said, starting to descend the path. Without looking back, I followed him, not knowing if what I had said would have any effect. Later, once we were home, Clara wanted to know how the walk had gone. "Better than I expected," I admitted, "but it's going to take time." She nodded with a hint of serenity. "Sergio is listening, although she doesn't. It seemed like he heard you." That night while I was praying, I felt an indescribable peace. I had no idea what awaited Gabriel or our family, but I was certain that I wasn't alone on this path. A few weeks passed in which I lived in constant tension, alternating moments when I felt closer to Gabriel than ever, with others when a heavy silence intervened, as if neither of us knew how to address our emotions. It was evident that we were both trying to get to know each other again, even though we didn't always understand each other. One Sunday afternoon, Clara and I were in the living room when the phone rang. "Are you sitting down?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. I sat up, immediately sensing the urgency. "What's wrong, Mum?" "Your father had a stroke. He's been admitted to the emergency room." He burst out, holding back tears. I felt something pressing on my chest. I hadn't spoken to him for over a year. Our conversations had always been tense and distant, but the news hit me harder than I expected. Clara and we ran to the hospital. I was so stunned that I could barely think about what would happen when we finally reached the intensive care unit. I found my mother in the waiting room, exhausted with worry. "How is she?" I asked, almost breathless. She looked at me, her eyes watering. "The doctors were still running tests, they don't know the extent of the damage." I nodded, trying to stay calm, knowing that I wasn't just worried about his physical condition, but about the possibility of losing any chance of reconciling. Later, I stood in front of the glass door of my father's room, watching him hooked up to machines that seemed to keep him alive. He looked fragile and unrecognizable, and suddenly I felt the full weight of the years in which we had barely spoken of anything truly meaningful. I thought of my own experience on the brink of death, in the peace I felt in the presence of Jesus, and how everything suddenly became clear. Would my father have the chance to feel something similar, or was it too late for him? My heart was in my throat. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and sat down beside him, wondering if I ever had the chance to mend what had broken between us. My father's eyes opened with a slight flicker, and for the first time in years, I noticed a glimmer of recognition in his gaze. "Dad," I whispered, my voice heavy with emotion. "It's me, Sergio." He focused his gaze on me, and in his features, I saw no resentment or reproach, but a deep weariness. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten.